Now on Channel 4, what would Chris Tame of the Libertarian Alliance do if he were Prime Minister?
Gives his permission. Independent Radio News.
James Whale, 9-9.
Just catching you out. Welcome to the programme. Whale is on, coast to coast. And my first guest is a man who possibly would like to be Prime Minister, but I would imagine has absolutely no chance whatsoever of ever becoming Prime Minister. His name is Chris Tame. Welcome to you, Chris.
Hi, James.
You are now the director of the Libertarian Alliance. If you'd like to speak to Chris about his libertarian views, and his views are very libertarian, it has to be said, we'll take some calls in a little while. But first, let's find out exactly, Chris, what you would do. First day at number 10, there we are, sitting behind the Prime Minister's desk. What's the first thing you do?
Well, I think I'd sit down with my experts to begin with and say, look, the theme of my government is to be a reduced government. Now, the libertarian view is that most social and economic problems are either created or worsened by government action. And what we want to do is reduce government interference in most areas of life.
Under the regime of the Libertarian Alliance, will there be entrepreneurs? Will there be small businesses? Will people who want to be wealthy still be able to?
There will be an explosion of opportunity. Our society is failing precisely because it's burdened with over-regulation in every area of life. You try to put your head up and start a business, especially ordinary working people, they're hit by regulation after regulation and all sorts of taxation. I mean, the trouble with the Tories telling people to get on their bikes is, of course, they tax people's income away, they regulate the production of bikes. Britain, and in fact, the free societies of the West, precisely became prosperous and industrialised because we had more freedom. The countries that do best in the world are the freest.
You don't believe the old adage, then, that one man's freedom and liberty is another man's straitjacket?
Not at all. One man's liberty is another man's liberty. You know, as long as we understand liberty to mean, you know, where my fist ending before your nose begins.
It's really a matter of self-discipline. You know, if we're going to have a free society, you need individuals who are self-responsible, look after themselves, not only their health, you know, but they take responsibility for themselves in, you know, all aspects. Libertarians aren't for, you know, the liberty to sort of attack, you know, to create havoc, to create chaos. You know, they're for liberty in terms of responsibility. Now, that may mean making mistakes, you know, regarding oneself, but it doesn't mean that you can be aggressive towards other people or harm other people's liberty.
I've always been interested in politics from, well, as early as I can remember, quite frankly. I got interested, I think, through reading science fiction, which had a lot of radical, sort of libertarian, free market ideas in it.
Freedom benefits everybody, not just me, but everybody in the world, basically. It's the answer to most of the social and economic problems that, you know, beset humanity.
Libertarians aren't sort of drippy, hippie people who believe that people should be sort of subsidised in their behaviour or supported by other people. Responsibility, self-responsibility goes along with freedom. In fact, that's one of the good things about freedom. It makes people responsible for themselves. Libertarians are sometimes called right-wing, but I think most of us reject the terminology. We don't believe in laws against private sexual choices, private sexual behaviour. We don't believe in censorship. We don't believe in interference by the state in people's personal lives. Now, that's very often seen as a sort of a left-wing position. On the other hand, we also believe in, you know, economic freedom, in free enterprise and free markets, which are often believed to be right-wing.
We believe that we've got the correct science of society, an analysis which is not merely economic but political, philosophical, moral, sociological, psychological. You know, libertarianism is a systematic ideology which goes through every academic discipline, every form of science.
Of course, there are so many policies one would want to pursue. In terms of self-responsibility, I think ordinary citizens should be allowed to own guns. I think we need to stop interfering in what people do with their own bodies. If we decriminalise drug consumption, most of the problems associated with it would decrease because they're essentially problems created by prohibition. And in fact, if most so-called public places were actually privately owned, people become responsible for them and take much better care of them.
You have an agenda which should be cherished, and it is a precious flame of libertarianism which needs to be cupped and kept alive.
The honest working classes of this country have actually been corrupted by excessive welfarism. I think the state supporting anything is the best way to destroy anything. So I tremble with fear when I hear Conservatives talk about defending or supporting the family. That's the easiest way to destroy.
I think it's unlikely that you'll be Prime Minister in the short term, simply because, as you divine, the British electorate has become addicted to this great udder, which is supplying them taxpayers' money in the form of the welfare state. And I think it's now politically extremely difficult to see how that can all be choked off.
It's government which massacres people, it's government which gives special privileges, it's government which indoctrinates people, it's government which messes up the economy. Well, I'd use a chainsaw to prune it back. No more state education just produces morons. I'd close down the Bank of England. All banks could issue their own notes. No more state police force. Security companies can compete for private contracts. And most of all, no more handouts. Fact is, fundamentally, Sir Patrick is a member of the old order. He sees government as being a solution rather than the problem. The state isn't delivering on its promises. Now, we don't want to rob people of welfare because we're nasty. We want to actually make sure they get better welfare, and I don't think that the state can provide that welfare.
Governments are never quite as effective as they would like to be. And I think most of us start by thinking we're over-governed and we'd like to have less government. But it seems to me that what is fundamental about your policies is that they seem to me to require a complete change in human nature. And that you would find yourself as Prime Minister, instead of being in the position of saying, look, I want less government over this, look at the appalling way government policies work out over that, you would find yourself at the receipt of all the complaints of those who would have said, your libertarian policy has come ahead of people being able to be responsible enough to respond to it.
Libertarians like to draw, in a sense, from both left and right, and there was a very good tradition of the friendly society, of voluntary communitarianism, and one good thing about the present Labour Party, it seems to be looking at that sort of thing again. You know, let's have welfare provided that way, again with a stake in these very enterprises, in this sort of property from ordinary people, and not having it stolen by the government, who then tends to spend it on a lot of other things which don't necessarily benefit the mass of the people.
The principle of the stakeholder is a good principle, and I think voters will respond to that. The difficulty is one has to assume that you're going to be Prime Minister in the world as it is. In the world as it is, we've got a very, very large number of unemployed. Far too many people caught within the poverty trap. These people are going to, unfortunately, continue to depend upon taxpayers' money unless, and perhaps you're prepared to contemplate the idea that they should be deprived of all that many of them will then not find work to do, and you will have an even larger number of homeless and impoverished people on the streets, and maybe getting very quickly into the kind of mood that led to the protests at the time of the poll tax.
I fear that the sort of the caution I hear in your voice, the caution of the Sir Humphreys, if I may put it that way, tends to lack the real radical vision, the ability to seize the opportunity, which we need. We need a bit of fire in our bellies if we're going to achieve both freedom and responsibility.
Well, Chris, as a Prime Minister, your invective would be excellent. Your rhetoric would be vigorous. My job is to bring back what I think is reality.
My reality is a property-owning democracy where we own our own homes and club together to buy up the streets we live in as well. They'll be tidier, and if we run them ourselves, we'll get rid of crime too. One of my basic ideas is to extend the whole privatisation model to all public places. In other words, we don't want public places, we want them to be private, so the streets themselves to be owned in some way privately. Now, maybe that's by the people on both sides of the road.
In terms of selling, crikey, yes. I mean, there is... Trafalgar Square is one of the most famous names in the world. Give me Trafalgar Square. I'd love to sell it. Selling the less affluent parts would be harder, obviously. It's very sellable. Parts of Peckham and Lewisham would be no problem at all, as long as the price is correct.
Property is the great problem solver. You know, if you extend the property rights from the individual over what is now public space, which tends to be squalor, you solve lots of problems, you raise standards, you give people a stake in the property that they now own, you give them incentive to maximise their profits, think of new way of using that property. There's scope for you, hopefully, to make more money, you know, and to think of more ways of generating profit from that property.
I think it's a fantastic idea to be able to sell off property. That's what it is business. But at the same time, I think you have to have a certain amount of control over the maintenance of the building and the standard that's kept up to. The problem is if you're suggesting selling great areas like Trafalgar Square, then the chances are it's going to go to the highest. You'll want to sell it to the highest bidder. The highest bidder will more than likely be a large company such as McDonald's or Coca-Cola, and then of course they're going to want to advertise. And that could lead to huge areas of London being like Piccadilly Circus.
Action!
But I've never actually laid my hand on a real firearm in my life. But my view is that the citizens should have them. You know, we want an armed citizenry and disarmed criminals. I look forward to the day when we'll have real guns and we can use them against real criminals.
It's a different experience. I feel alive. My skin feels supple. Really, really soft. When I tried Dove Cream Shower, I had such a great feeling. Like with yoga, a kind of glow.
New Dove Cream Shower is different, and its moisturizing cream helps strengthen your skin's natural defenses against moisture loss. For softer, smoother skin.
My skin feels wonderful. And so do I.
Someone's got their eyes on your car. Always leave it secured with your belongings out of sight.
Oh, we are looking sporty this morning.
Yes, Catherine wants me to play her brother. She thought he'd benefit from my expertise.
Hang on a minute. From the look of that racket, you haven't played in years.
Yeah, but a real sportsman never loses his touch.
It was good of you to let him win.
That's always been your problem. Generous to a fault.
The new Renault Megane, from £9,995 on the road. It talks your language.
Sometimes it took days to get information back. We're very different then.
Did you achieve everything you wanted? Did you have the technology you needed?
No.
Did you have computers in your day?
Oh, yes.
Were they linked to communications?
No. No, we could not do that.
But you could do it now.
Now? It is too late now.
You can have it now. The communications you need. Call AT&T, because life's too short.
Delicate, soft and gentle. but without the perfume. Sensitive care from new Dove Extra Sensitive.
Of all the policies I've been putting forward, the idea that ordinary citizens ought to own guns is probably considered the looniest by most people. They think of guns as being, horrible, nasty things. Criminals have them. Best way to stop crime is to take guns away from people. But I actually think that's wrong, and I know you've got quite a bit of evidence to sort of support my case.
Yeah.
So.
The majority of people won't look at the facts. The right to keep arms was a basic part of the British Constitution until 1920. It was removed by, or at least restricted by, dishonest politicians lying. They presented legislation to Parliament saying that it was to control armed crime. There was no armed crime in any real sense. The whole thing was based on fear of revolution. They were anticipating that the working people of this country were actually going to revolt, and therefore you had a government which was so afraid of its own position that it wanted legislation so that it could, in their own words, seize firearms and redistribute them to friends of the government.
But I mean, have we had cases, though, where the citizenry was generally armed, and in fact a Hungerford-type massacre was stopped because one of the citizens actually shot the madman?
The one that springs to mind is a situation in Israel several years ago, about 15 miles south of Tel Aviv. An Arab terrorist group came in with the idea that they would machine gun bus stops and concentrations of people. They were going to do half a dozen of these things. And they got to the first one and managed to kill one person when the whole team was mown down by people waiting for the bus, civilians.
James Whale.
Talk to me.
On Talk Radio.
Okay, we're talking to Chris Tame, the director of the Libertarian Alliance tonight. If he was Prime Minister, what would he do? Well, we'd all be carrying submachine guns. Donna in Middlesex, you're on Talk Radio.
Hi, I'd just like to say that I would like to feel safe travelling in London. I think it's a good idea that citizens would be able to carry, well, guns or whatever.
Donna, you would be quite happy
I would like
to carry a gun?
Absolutely.
Jonathan in Dartford.
Suppose I'm walking down the street with my machine gun and I'm having an LSD trip, right? And I see some old lady, except I'm hallucinating. I think she's a Loch Ness Monster or something. And then I shoot her, right, because I'm tripping. I mean, how do you account for that?
And there could be a lot of Jonathans around.
Well, because they're already around at the moment, and they do often attack old ladies and so on. Unfortunately, old ladies don't have guns to shoot big burly men who have iron bars, knives and coshes.
If I'd have had a gun in my hand, there's no way I'd have shot them, because I was so frozen at the shock of being in an armed robbery. I couldn't have shot the person because I couldn't move my feet from the ground, although they were telling me to move and shouting at me. I couldn't move. I think everybody reacts differently in shock, and I think holding a gun isn't the answer.
No, I don't think that we should all be armed with guns. I just think it would create more havoc. I think if I'd have had a gun in the situation that night, like this lady says, I don't think I could have used that gun because I'm not that type of person. Although the one who shot my husband, he stood there so arrogant and just stared at him. I begged him not to shoot, and he still pulled that trigger because he was just that type of person. Life didn't mean anything to him, you know. And the same with his partner. He had a gun, and I think if I'd have had one, they wouldn't be just say I'd have shot him. Then his partner had a gun. That could have gone further. My husband would have got shot. I would have done. He would have done. And plus my son. It could have got really wild, you know, out of hand if we'd have all been in possession of guns on that particular night.
Or it could have got better because you might have been able to to shoot him. I mean, obviously, any particular circumstance, it might have been different. I mean, I'm not saying every circumstance having a gun is a help, you know, when you're taken by surprise and so on. But if you'd had one, then you might have been able to have prevented that.
I don't think if I'd have had a gun, I still couldn't have used it. And I don't think it's right to bring our children up in a world where they have to walk about or be armed with a gun. It's not right.
The fact
so prohibition doesn't stop it.
That drugs kill people, maim people, ruin people's lives totally.
The idea that drug takers are per se irrational, etc., have no control over themselves and so on, is simply incorrect. If you actually read the scientific literature on drugs, and in fact you look at the historical case, you know, that isn't the case. In fact, it actually isn't the case for people taking drugs now.
Okay,
you know,
so...
I mean, many people are able to take drugs and live ordinary lives. The trouble with prohibiting drugs is, of course, you force people into, you know, a criminal subculture. If drugs were sold in the same way as alcohol was sold, well, we don't see the brewers fighting it out in the streets. We don't see the brewers selling products which are dangerous because they've been adulterated. It would be a step forward to have legitimate business selling drugs than it is having criminals selling drugs. That would be a real step forward.
I don't think you understand the implications of your policies. I don't believe you understand the environment that many people are operating under. I don't think you understand the enormity of the effect on the community and the individual. You know, a simple solution to legalise drugs is not a solution. It's a soundbite. It's not a reality. I don't know the environment you come from, but I certainly know, working in a large inner city area, that drug use is devastating communities and has enormous economic effects.
It still seems to me that the case is overwhelming. That by legalising drugs, we get the criminals out, we improve the quality of the drugs.
That is so naive. Have you ever had rock cocaine?
You know, well, no, I hardly drink, I don't smoke, so...
So you're in a fine position to judge whether people can escalate into dependency. It doesn't really matter what I say based on our experience of working with people with dependent drug habits. I don't think you're going to change your view. I think that view belongs to your safe world. And I think if you were Prime Minister, I would be really rather concerned that you're taking the needs of a very small world and not looking at the larger, bigger issues.
No, I mean, it's not a safe world, it's a dangerous world, and it's being made dangerous by the sort of prohibition we have now. This is a problem that's despite the law. In fact, almost you can say drug addiction increases with the increase in prohibition throughout the world. There's nothing stopping drug addiction now. All we do is drive it into the hands of criminals, we create the chaos we see around us.
But by having simple solutions, oh, let's legalise it, that'll sort that out, that'll be done, then you're going to have to face the consequences of your policies, because that might be an awfully big mistake.
I would suggest to Chris, if I were Prime Minister, Chris, what I would do would be to say that firearms and drugs should be legalised in people's property, but that you should be very reluctant to apply the same principle to what is now state-owned property.
I think no matter how benign you are as a Prime Minister, you know, your decisions aren't going to be any better than any other government decisions, really.
One of the difficulties is that the libertarian ideas are not very well known. It was what made this country, the Industrial Revolution, was founded on libertarian ideas. But that's all been forgotten.
I personally do want to see anarcho-capitalism. But I would argue that I'll settle, because I know a lot of people don't agree, that I'll settle for rolling back the state to a smaller size, and I'm happy for Chris to do that. So I'll let him be the Prime Minister to shrink the size of the state down to 5% of GDP, and then I reckon we'll say, well, what's this for? And I say, we'll sell it off.
And maybe that's the point at which we can say, well, in fact, everything's proved pretty successful so far. And, you know, why can't ICI have its own tactical nuclear force, you know, and compete with other companies to defend Britain?
Sarah, do you think somebody like Chris Tame is dangerous?
Very Kerry.
Thank you for your call. Danny in Chelmsford, you're on Talk Radio. Hello.
Hello there.
Hi.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that if Chris was Prime Minister tomorrow, I'd be absolutely delighted. I think that what this country needs is actually an injection of genuine libertarianism. I think the problem that some of the callers...
Do you want to do yourself out of a job eventually?
Absolutely. One of the things I want to do is free the people of this country and eventually the world. I mean, I'd much rather, you know, be living a life where
Chris, if you were the Prime Minister, and if you started to make a success of this job, would you find it easy to give it up? Because that's the whole idea that we've been talking about all our adult lives.
I think so. I mean, the only reason I would want the power of the Prime Ministership would be, in fact, to destroy the power, to liberate the people. I've always suspected if libertarianism does come, it's probably unlikely to come from a libertarian Prime Minister, but more likely from everyone ignoring the state.
It's now almost perfectly symbolic that there is no central control of London. There has been no boss of London. And yet here it is, it flourishes, the lights still work, it sparkles, it glitters, it goes about its business. That's the world we want, isn't it?
Yeah. Only bigger, better and freer.
Yes. And taller. I would like things to be taller. Many, many more towers, many, many more plans, more people, more agendas, more visions.
And if we ever did run out of resources on this planet, there's a universe out there, and we're going to get there. And it's making profit, which is going to get us there at the end. You know, we'll start on the asteroid belts, you know, then we'll move out. Mars, Venus, you know, then the galaxies. And once we're out there, the state won't be able to destroy human liberty. Once we're in the infinity of space. What are the rewards of being driven around to European community banquets in limousines compared to going down in history as, well, one of the guys who put us on the road to the universe, the conquest, you know, the liberation of humanity.
An Eastender who spent much of his life in prison, Frankie Fraser, gives his prime ministerial manifesto in 2 weeks' time. That's at the same time, 8 o'clock.